Bienvenidos to the Paseo podcast. I am your host, Joshua Smyser-DeLeon. I'm joined today by a returning guest. His name is Carlos Berrios Polanco. He is a freelance independent journalist focused on extremism, political corruption, and civil unrest in Puerto Rico. Carlos, welcome back to the Paseo podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. It's good to be back.
Nice.
It was a short wait, but it feels great to be back.
Yeah, no, really glad to have you back. And for people listening, this is very impromptu. I literally hit up Carlos like a few hours ago because I've been seeing a big topic of discussion online, at least on Puerto Rico Twitter or Puerto Rican Twitter, whatever you want to call it, around this legislation that's currently I don't know. I don't know if this is the right word because I'm not as close to it as Carlos is, but being debated, being protested against in the legislative halls of Puerto Rico. The bill is called PC1003. So for people listening, I have been on the periphery of this news, so I'm going to be like a student in a classroom asking Carlos all types of questions. So Carlos, let's just dive right into it. What should people know about the PC1003 bill?
So, PC 1003 was a bill proposed by the House of Representatives in Puerto Rico with the aim to cut Puerto Rico's debt alongside the Financial Oversight Management Board of Puerto Rico's debt restructuring plan. And the most important thing to know is that PC 1003 has now been passed into law. It got passed into law in the late hours of October 26, 2021, and it's now called Law 53, the law to put an end to Puerto Rico's bankruptcy. So basically, the aim of the law, as the PR government puts it, is to end or to cut in half Puerto Rico's debt. Meanwhile, people in opposition to the law and to the bill have actively said that the thing that it'll do is increase Puerto Rico's debt while paying off vulture funds. So while it'll pay like the shareholders, it'll actively make Puerto Ricans' lives worse than it already is. The original PC 1003 was set to cut pensions, education, and public utilities. The language in Law 53, which is what PC 1003 is now called, does not cut pensions, but it does freeze pensions for teachers and judges, and it eliminates cost of life adjustments.
What's up with that? Why is it that when it comes to legislation like this to save money, pensions are one of the first things on the table to get cut? I don't know, you said it was introduced in the House, so I'm just trying to figure out what type of representative in Puerto Rico would actually, with a straight face, say, yeah, we want to save money by cutting your money.
The House bill was mostly put on by New Progressive and Popular Democratic Party members, and one of them, I can't remember who right now, basically said like things are going to be tight, but we'll pay it, which was like immediately met with just like on Twitter and social media, immediately met with a wave of boos, because I think the quote unquote logic of cutting pensions is that people who are working now won't see that effect until like 20, 30 years in the future. So they make the promise, oh no, things will change from now to then, which is the promise that lawmakers make about Puerto Rico's debt, that you're working. So for example, I'm 23 years old. I'm working now. By the time that you retire, we'll have fixed those like ugly bits of debt in the middle, and you'll be getting that pension by the time you're 65 or whatever. But the truth is that that's rarely what has happened in the history of Puerto Rico and the history of economics worldwide, is that once you start seeing cuts to pensions, it's very rare that those ever go back to the amount that they were. Instead, they're usually pensions usually continue getting lowered.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a part of the overall assault on working class people, working class families. My gosh, how great would it be if we had pensions, like you and I here? Like, I mean, man, I think that would eliminate so much stress from people's lives. So Just when legislators put that on the table as a cut, it's like, I don't know. It's just so confusing.
I agree. I mean, that's one of the things that is like one of the background stressors in a lot of young people's lives now is just like, or at least for me and my friends, it's very much been like the background voice is like, don't worry, you won't have or you should worry, you won't have a pension when you get older. And I feel like if that voice was eliminated, the amount of like stress on people's shoulders that would immediately evaporate would be tremendous.
100% agree. So all right, so if I'm hearing you correctly, we talked about pensions. There was an attempt to cut it that ended up not going through. It just froze it. Then cuts to education was the other thing.
Yeah, and
how did the negotiations go there? Was anything taken back?
Not really. The only thing that was taken back in the negotiations of the PC1003 is the pension cuts. Every other cut is still slated to go into effect. So the thing about PC1003 is that it was enacted so that the Financial Oversight and Management Board, La Junta, could pass its debt restructuring plan. And while I believe legally speaking, they don't have to adhere by Law 53, they've kind of like framed it as throwing us a bone. And they're now formulating a new debt restructuring plan that takes Law 53 into account in some way. I believe that the text of that new debt restructuring plan has still not been published, but we'll probably get it in a few days now.
Is this the first debt restructuring plan, or is this one of many?
The Junta was established in 2016, and I believe the first debt restructuring plan was 2019, and then this would be the second with a few like mini restructures in between both.
And the purpose for a new debt restructuring plan was, do we know? Like, what was the purpose?
I mean, so this is the thing that it's like they enact a new debt restructuring plan to like establish a method for Puerto Rico to pay its debt, but that's just not what's going to happen. So a lot of economists have said that it looks like Puerto Rico is going to default on its debt again in 2036. Yeah. But when Puerto Rico initially defaulted on its debt is what got the Junta in place and Promesa in place. Mm-hmm. But I imagine the plan of La Junta is to say, oh, we're doing something to restructure the island's debt so that they can like get the shareholders off their back. Because before this debt restructuring plan is set to take place, we were paying about 270 something, and after this plan is set to take place, we'll be paying 300 plus. So we're paying more than we were before, but we still have the same amount of debt.
Jeez.
Which is in the one accounting class I took in college, it doesn't really sound like it makes any sense at all.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't think you have to ever go to a math class to realize that don't make no damn sense. Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. So you're paying more, but not really. So basically, it's like trying to get out of quicksand.
One protester I talked to was telling me about how he once went bankrupt, and this is an argument that I've seen a lot of people use. Mm-hmm. When he went bankrupt, there were certain things that he had to make sure that he paid. So like his car, his electric, his water, his house, right? And how if you take that like kind of framework to the Puerto Rican government and the Junta, they've decided to not pay electric, not pay for education, but instead to pay the shareholders. So instead of paying public benefits to benefit the people of Puerto Rico, they've been paying and will continue to pay the shareholders that own Puerto Rico's debt.
Yeah, they're taking the student loans approach. You can file for bankruptcy, but you can't get rid of your student loans by filing for bankruptcy, which is like criminal in my mind. But that's another show.
I strongly agree.
Yeah, definitely another topic for another day, though. But So, okay, so I just so I'm following. So, it's the second new debt restructuring plan. Is there a so, and we've talked about the connection between La Junta, the board, the oversight board, and this policy. Um, has the connection been made to like like are the politicians that introduced this like tight with La Junta? Are they La Junta supporters? Like, just trying to think of the connection there. Like, is that making sense? Like, I don't want to sound conspiratorial. I don't if that's the way that it's coming out. I mean, from the
Yeah, no, the,
perspective of like, what's the level of pressure look like? Is it just legislators like, hey, this is kind of lingering over us, let's handle it, or is it like we're squeezing you to do something about it at all, by all means necessary?
well, I don't want to sound conspiratorial either, but it's no secret that Governor Perlisi has been going to bat for La Junta previously, and I believe that he previously worked as one of their lawyers before he became governor. But the new Progressive Party is kind of like a little bit tight with La Junta. The Popular Democratic Party less so, but still kind of close. And the thing is, like, they kind of pretty much always do La Junta's bidding, but there is also that like oversight pressure of La Junta, like pretty much always coming down on all of the Puerto Rican government. So like while I don't wanna just blame the PNP politicians, no matter how much I dislike them. There is this kind of like external pressure always on them.
Well, yeah, no, I was seeing a little bit of that on. I think they issued a letter when there was when they were Puerto Rico was seeing like the height of a lot of those protests when the bill was still being deliberated on before it was voted on. Like I thought there was a letter the board sent to the House or the Puerto Rico's Congress saying, "Hey, if you don't pass this, you don't want you don't want to know what's gonna happen after that." Kind of like almost like a mob letter, kind of, you know?
Yeah, kind of like that. It was
Yeah.
Thursday the 21st.
Okay.
Because the Senate had been deliberating on the contents of PC 1003 for a while, and each time it came up to vote, it didn't have enough votes. So the junta was like, "Hey, if you don't pass it, you'll really see the side effects and after effects of Puerto Rico's bankruptcy." They sent that on the 21st at night with the deadline of them having to pass it Friday at 2 p.m. But they let the deadline lapse, and instead, PPD and PNP politicians seemingly came to an agreement on Sunday night. But they came to an agreement on Sunday night about the contents of PC 1003. But on Thursday, the 21st, they had went into recess until Tuesday, so they passed it on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. So,
but it is.
Yeah. No, please.
No, on Monday, the day before it was passed, there was a hearing with the court district judge Laura Taylor Swain, who's the judge that oversees Puerto Rico's debt process and debt restructuring and all that. And she was basically saying like, "Oh, my patience is wearing thin about dealing with Puerto Rico's debt," which, is not great when you're like dealing with the lives of 3.3 something million people. You're just like, I'm tired of doing this, and I'm. It's not a great sentiment.
So, what exactly were those cuts to education? Was that closing down University of Puerto Rico campuses? Was that shutting down elementary schools? Like, what are we talking about when we say cuts to education?
So, I'm most familiar with the public university cuts. So, if you don't mind me, like just going off of that.
Yeah.
So, for the University of Puerto Rico, which is the only public university on the island, the wording in PC 1003 in the debt restructuring plan would assign $500 million for the entire University of Puerto Rico system for the next 5 years. But
it seems,
and
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it seems pretty low, right? Especially for a university that has 11 campuses across the whole island, and that's naturally what students have been like. Hey, 500 million isn't even close to enough. Like, we were already doing badly. 500 million is not at all enough for us to keep operating at the level we've been. Instead, we'll be forced to shrink. And this has been one of the main preoccupations that students have brought up, is that if this plan goes through, which it did, and it continues the way it's supposed to go, they will likely be forced to close campuses across the island. One of the main campuses that people have been talking about being possibly the first to close is the Utuado campus, which is the campus with the only public university campus with an agriculture program.
Oh my God.
So if a student wanted to study agriculture, they'd be relegated to private universities only. And actually, in the middle of deliberations for PC1003, it was announced that the university, Ana Jimenez, got a $275,000 grant to create an agriculture program. And like no one's really sure of the funding, of where that funding came from, but it's like very suspicious that you're planning to close or possibly closing one campus and then like giving it to a private campus. It's part of the whole privatization problem that you take away resources from something that doesn't affect people that much monetarily, and then you give it to people who would charge an arm and a leg for the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the amount of debt that people will have to decide to either take on or not for their education in a field that they enjoy or have a passion for, you just completely cut that off. Or you're basically signing away people to a life of just paying off debt on an island where the median salary is like 20 to 30K. So it's like, that's not sustainable. Okay, and then the other thing you mentioned was public, just to kind of keep it moving here, because this all is horrible. Just strap in, everybody. Public service, no. It's not great. Just going to get worse from here, everybody. So buckle up. You mentioned cuts to public service as well. Now, last time we had you on, we talked about Luma Energy taking over Puerto Rico's electrical grid. People listening, after you're done listening to this, go listen to that. But public services, what other public services were on the table? Because last time I think you were on, you were talking about maybe water was something that they were thinking of trying to privatize.
Yeah, when the day that Luma took over the grid, took over the transmission of the grid, they were talking about possibly privatizing water. But one of the process to privatize the production of electricity is supposed to start, the process to do it, not the privatization of it, is supposed to start at the end of this year, beginning of 2022. But as they were deliberating on the bill, several mayors throughout Puerto Rico came to talk to politicians and be like, hey, if you pass this bill, like we won't have enough money to like operate municipal governments the way that we've been doing it, and we might have to close altogether. I believe 30 or more, something like a lot of mayors were like, hey, you can't pass this because we'll basically be left with almost no funding to run a whole municipality. And actually, just a couple hours before we started recording, Pierluisi signed a bill that provides 5.4 million, or that continues 5.4 million government grants to Puerto Rico municipalities. So it's like we're going to cut your funding, but then we'll give you like less funding in the form of a grant instead of just like continuing the funding that they need.
And the benefit being there, it's a grant, so it comes with a time limit. It's more finite.
Yeah.
As opposed to being locked into an annual budget. It's just like, oh, what do we have to give around this time? So they freeze them up to lower it potentially even further if they wanted to, theoretically. Okay, so you talked a little bit about this too. There's lots of protests against PC1003. I'd like to kind of get your sense of what you feel the next chapter in this story is. Are we just going to keep seeing more and more protests? Are we going to see legislation trying to repeal that bill? Like, what's kind of the next chapter here?
So pretty much both. Or yesterday, Maria de Lourdes from the Puerto Rico Independence Party introduced legislation to repeal Law 53. And that was just yesterday, so I'm sure it's going to go through the whole process, and we'll see how that turns out. But I don't know. Personally, I don't see it turning out like being able to repeal the law, but whole body cross that it's able to. And then we have the confirmation process for the debt restructuring plan, which is set to begin on November 8th. And then in response, people have called a protest on November 8th at 8 a.m. At the federal courthouse where that confirmation process is set to take place. And there was actually a protest today at the same place where people placed like makeshift coffins in front of the gates of the building.
Yeah, I saw that. That was a pretty powerful statement. I mean, this is why I love the creativity of protesters, because it's Dia de los Muertos. Like, they brought out the coffins. They had the different things that would be cut or damaged by this being confirmed. I was like, man, it's like it's so inventive. It's just I just hope the right people are seeing that, because as for this bill to get this far, it's just like what are the elected officials of Puerto Rico really doing? So it's not that's where my mind goes initially. So it's nice to hear that there are politicians in the legislature that are actually introducing bills to kind of fix or rectify a lot of the damage that could potentially be caused by PC 1003 or will be caused by PC 1003.
And I mean, just to be fair, it almost didn't pass. Like they were the vote for it was 14-13 in the Senate and 14-11 in the House of Representatives. So there was they were at, I mean, they were at an impasse for quite a bit, but then sadly it did pass. But there are several senators and representatives actively working against bills or against this bill and other bills like it, and even some I've seen Maria de Lourdes and other Independence Party and Citizens Victory politicians walking and speaking to protesters as well at the Capitol and at other protests.
Yeah, okay. That's so good to know, because again, like man, how does something like this get, like, what is the majority? Like, oh my gosh, how did they get in the office? And then so it's nice to know that, I mean, to the extent that it could be nice, maybe things are trending in a better direction where there's getting more and more politicians that are thinking about people first instead of this like vulture capitalist profit that's hanging over the island's head.
I know the good thing about this, or not the good thing, the air quotes good thing about this is that it's not like a one and done. We're through with the process. This is like a very, very long process of confirmation for this debt restructuring plan. So it'll start on the 8th of November, but it could take up to a year, possibly even more, to finally like be set in stone. And even then, part of the branding by Pierluisi and his party was that this is the bill that finally gets La Junta out of Puerto Rico. But the truth is that this is like an immense kind of like Baroque plan that affects 3.3 plus million people. So the junta will have to continue to be on the island dealing with like every little thing that pops up. So it's not really a plan to like get it away from the island. Yeah. In fact, it assures that they'll be here for the whole like process of instituting, administrating, and making sure that it like goes into place.
That sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it's not. It's bad, not good. That's what I say when I don't have like the mental energy to deal with everything.
So, what do people that are against this debt restructuring plan? What is the solution that they are proposing? Because the thing I hear a lot is just cancel the debt. That's That's what I hear as the big solution. Do I have that right, or are there other solutions that are debated?
Well, that's I feel like that's the most that is a very common solution, but it is also like the most like politically extreme sort of.
Mhm.
There are others that argue that the debt could be talked down, that we could fix things in Law 53. One of the big things is that the debt hasn't been audited. So like there's things that you could lower it by a substantial amount if it were audited, but it hasn't been.
Yeah.
But I mean, they could
Mm.
the U.S. government could cancel the debt. It's I think they could do it. I feel like it's pretty easy, but
Yeah.
they won't, because they want to pay the shareholders to
Yeah.
make them more rich.
All right, so we have so between a rock and a hard place, literally. Not There's not enough political courage to cancel the debt, and the only will that there seems to be is trying to just kind of cut and cut and cut. And I just don't know where that ends. That just sounds. I mean,
Yeah, I mean the one thing that I feel like is for sure that will continue is the student strikes,
mhm.
especially since two campuses at least have called for an indefinite strike. I
Mhm.
think we're likely to see that continue. Whether it escalates to something bigger, we'll see. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm. All right. Well, the story continues, as they say. We'll see how the story pans out. I appreciate you coming on the show, Carlos, because, like I said at the top and before we recorded, I've been so checked out lately these past few days. So I'm like speeding up on Puerto Rico news, and I've been very curious about this. So I appreciate you filling in the blanks for me. Okay, so let people know. I mean, you shared it last time you were on the show, but give it to us again. How can people keep up with you after they're done listening to this episode?
so you can find most of my kind of like journalism and journalist-y things on my Twitter, at Vaquero2XL, which is VAQUERO 2XL. And that's pretty much where I post everything I do. And then I'm also like a regular contributor to Latino Rebels.
Definitely a Twitter feed worth following. I will say that for sure. Okay, Carlos Berrios Polanco, thank you so much for being on the show. Once again, people that are listening, Carlos is a freelance journalist, freelance independent journalist, I should say, focused on covering extremism, political corruption, and civil unrest in Puerto Rico. Thanks for coming on, man.